Welcome back to the Heath. The Iran nuclear talks are now in overtime in Vienna as Iran and 6 world powers attempt to reach a nuclear accord by Tuesday's deadline. Joining us now from Princeton University in New Jersey is Hossein Mousavian. He's a former Iranian diplomat and is the author of Iran and the United States, an insider's view on the failed past and the road to peace. And with us here in our Washington, D.C. studio is Ambassador Marc Grossman. He served 29 years in the U.S. Foreign Service and retired from the State Department as the third-ranking official. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Ambassador Grossman, what is your assessment of the talks right now taking place in Vienna?
Well, I think the fact that the talks continue, the fact that there's a new deadline, are important things. I think the world is watching what's going to happen in Vienna. These are very important talks, not just for the nuclear question, but for the future of U.S.-Iran relations. There are some very important issues that obviously yet to be decided, but I think the fact that Secretary Kerry is there, the Iranian foreign minister is there, people are doing this seriously, and I'd say I know this is hard for the press, but the fact that they seem to be keeping this quiet and private and talking to each other is a really important thing. But there's some very big issues yet to be decided, and we'll see how it comes out.
But the fact that the talks keep being extended, the deadline keeps being extended, it's like kicking the can down the road, isn't it?
Well, negotiations, and I'm sure the ambassador will agree with me, that's how these negotiations work. You know, people hold on to their positions until the end. And it's a test to see, you know, what compromises are available, what national interests are. And very importantly, I think both for Iranian negotiators and for American negotiators, is what public opinion is like in their home countries. And so if you're Secretary Kerry, who I can think of, what his life is like, perhaps I'm not so good at thinking about what the Iranian foreign minister's life is like, it's really hard. So you're juggling all of these things. You know, for example, if you're Secretary Kerry, you know that when you come back to the United States of America, to your president, to the Congress, to the public, you're going to have to answer questions about monitoring and verification. You'll have to answer questions about the military sites. You'll have to answer these questions about sanctions, how they come off, when they come off, which sanctions come off. You'll have to answer questions about verification, as you know, and I'm sure the ambassador does as well from being such an astute observer of our country. There are other issues that are around the U.S.-Iran relationship. The detainees, the Washington Post reporter, for example, or Iran and American efforts in the region. So there's the nuclear question, and then there are the larger questions as well. And I think on both sides, people have to be thinking, how am I going to present this back in my home country to my leadership and to my public?
And on the nuclear side, I think you've hit upon the main issues that we are told are the main sticking points in these negotiations right now. Ambassador Mousavian, what is your view? What is your take on this? Have the talks, do you think, reached a critical make or break point now?
I believe so. To my understanding, 95% of the draft is done. And perhaps the most important issues, at least 90%, I would say, have been resolved because, number one, there is no more dispute left about all measures within Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. They have agreed everything within the framework of NPT. You know, the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, is the only credible international treaty on nuclear proliferation. And from the first day, Iran and the US, and the world powers, they agreed that non-proliferation treaty would be the criteria for a final deal. Therefore, I can say today, within agreement already reached, Iran would be committed to the maximum level of transparency measures within Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. However, there has been some issues raised by specifically the US and Western countries about measures beyond NPT as confidence building toward preventing any pathway of possible diversion toward weaponization. I believe major issues on heavy water of Iraq already agreed. It means Iran for a long period would not have reprocessing. And as long as you have no reprocessing, it's impossible to make a nuclear bomb from heavy water. Iran would agree not to export spent fuel, and also would make technical changes to minimize the production of weapon-grade plutonium at Iraq.
Right.
Therefore, all objective guarantees that heavy water at Iraq would not divert toward weaponization is already agreed. Then I would come to enrichment facilities. Also on enrichment facilities, major issues already agreed, because Iran would accept for long period to enrich below 5%. You know, as long as you are enriching below 5%, it's impossible to make a nuclear bomb through enrichment facilities.
Okay. Ambassador Grossman, earlier this week, President Obama issued a warning saying that if the United States does not see a good agreement, and as you just pointed out, the president is under pressure from Congress, is under pressure from Israel, is under pressure from other interests here in the United States. If the United States does not get a deal that is acceptable, it will walk away from these negotiations. Can the U.S. really afford to do that, or is this just the president posturing before?
No, I think the president has staked out a position. And when you say he's under pressure, well, yes, there are all of these interests in the United States and around the world, but I think he puts himself under pressure in the proper way. I mean, he's the leader of the United States. He's got to meet a certain standard, and he's set out those standards. The standards, I think, were set out after the first interim arrangement was made. You'll recall the 4-page document that was issued by the White House.
Right.
And if you issue that kind of statement, and you're the president of the United States, your job then is to say, well, did the final agreement come close to the interim agreement and the standards that we established?
But that 4-page agreement that you talk about, wasn't the president under pressure to show some progress at that point?
Well, what I was going to say, actually, to the ambassador's very good points, there's some history here. I mean, don't forget that both sides have met a certain number of obligations in the interim agreements.
Right.
And so that's, I think, been a positive thing. I think, as he says, although 90% of this agreement might be reached, and he'll have better information on this than I will,
right.
As I said in my introduction, you never go into this negotiation without saying that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Right.
And so the issue of history, the issue of military sites, and very importantly, as the ambassador said, and as I mentioned, this issue of how do sanctions get lifted, when, how, which ones. And just as you said, President Obama's made some statements. Well, the leader of Iran made a statement last week as well, saying, excuse me, my understanding is sanctions will come off, immediately upon the signing of this agreement or coming into force of this agreement. So, as he said, the negotiators have some work to do. But I think the president has set a standard here rather than being put under any great pressure by anybody out from the outside. He's got some questions to answer, as I said in my introduction, just as an Iranian negotiator would when they go home. They have to justify what they've done to their leadership and to their public.
Yeah, the critics of the president here in the United States say he's making too many concessions because he wants a deal before he leaves office. He wants an agreement.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons, sir, that the president spoke, which was to say to the world, yes, I'd like an agreement. It's obvious that the United States would like an agreement, but they're not going to sign up to any agreement. They're going to sign up to one that the judgment is good for our country, and I hope also good for Iran and good for the world.
Right. Ambassador Mousavian, when President Obama talks about walking away from the negotiations, I'm wondering what the options would be left then on the table, because we had the U.S. Defense Secretary, Ashton Carter, say in April, he told CNN that, look, we are focusing on the talks, but we will use the military option if they fail.
I really don't believe neither Iran and nor the U.S. would walk away, because they have already achieved unprecedented achievements on the nuclear talks after 11, 12 years of nuclear negotiations, because there is nothing left about all Iranian commitments within NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, because Iran is the only country now has agreed for a long period to have some commitments even beyond NPT, like enriching below 5% or having no reprocessing at heavy water facility at Iraq. I believe President Obama would be in perfect position after the deal to announce that Iran now is committed to the maximum level of commitments within the framework of non-proliferation treaty. Iran has accepted the most intrusive inspections within the international rules and regulations. And therefore, what we were expecting from the day one, we wanted Iran to stick to its commitments to the international treaty, non-proliferation treaty at the maximum level, and we have achieved. And then I believe President Rouhani and his foreign minister, they would be in good position domestically to say, look, ultimately we were fighting for 11 years or 35 years for our legitimate rights within non-proliferation treaty to have peaceful nuclear technology, including enrichment or heavy water or light water facilities, like other non-proliferation member treaty members, like Europeans, like other Asian countries, and we got it. And then he would be able to say, look, also the world powers, they have accepted to lift the sanctions. Obama would have two big points to mention to public opinion: that Iran at the maximum level of commitment within the framework of non-proliferation treaty, and Iran accepting all pathways toward possible diversion of its nuclear program toward nuclear weapon. These two would be big points, right, which the world was waiting for many years. And Rouhani also would say our rights are respected and sanctions are lifted. That's why I believe they would not walk away. I'm very optimistic they would strike the deal within 4 or 5 days. Okay.
Ambassador Grossman, they may not walk away, but there is opposition here in the United States from Congress. Mm-hmm. Is there any chance that Congress could derail an agreement?
Well, we'll see. You have to see what the agreement is. I mean, I'm just guessing here because we don't know what the outcome is. But I think if the outcome is something that is as close as possible to the standards that have been set both in the 4-page document and in President Obama and other statements, there'll be a debate in Congress, there'll be a debate in public, as there should be. This is a very important issue. But I think when that debate is finished, people will say, well, there's a verifiable agreement. There's a monitorable agreement. It looks into the history. We understand how sanctions will be lifted. Very importantly as well, we understand what might happen and what will happen if there are violations. And I think if the president can go down and say to the public and through the public to the Congress, I've got an arrangement here that meets important American strategic objectives about Iran's nuclear posture, and here are the ways it does so. There's going to be a debate. There'll be a lot of opposition, but I think in the end, the president can win this argument if it's a strong deal.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.